Thank you, everybody. As Neil just said, I am standing in for my Chief Executive, Nick, who's been called away for Chief Executive sort of duties. So, as I said, I'm Barney. I've been working for Young Somerset as a service manager for about, well, not as a service manager, but for Young Somerset for about 20 years now. So today's a bit of talking from me. It's going to be a bit of talk about what Young Somerset do, how we engage with young men, a little bit about some of the sort of mental health services we put on for young men, that sort of thing, and obviously a little bit of discussion at the end. So I'll start off with what Young Somerset kind of does as a youth work charity. So we're probably the largest youth work charity in Somerset, working on a sort of project-based sort of youth work model. So our role really is to engage and support young people across Somerset, a range of different projects. So, and we do that through sort of some key kind of ways where we kind of work with young people. So we build relationships, social, economic, educational. We encourage inclusion, promote lifelong learning. That's really important. One of the key 5 pillars of mental health. And then we try and kind of take on board their experience and their voice. So participation, we call it, in the kind of youth work sector. So just trying to kind of like, so the projects that we design and put on for young people are kind of led by them, as their voice is very much kind of crucial in designing those projects. A little bit now about the structure of the organisation. This is how we do it. So the 3 main kind of strands to Young Somerset: targeted youth work and alternative education division. So that's my kind of area, that's where I work within the organisation. Those 2 have kind of been combined quite recently. It's a little bit misleading on the slide there. It looks like that's 2/3 of the organisation. That's probably about 1/3 of the organisation in terms of the number of people who work on those particular projects. And then obviously a key part of the organisation as well is the mental health and wellbeing side of things. So that's probably 2/3 of the organisation. We do work quite closely with the NHS across Somerset. So Young Somerset is probably is the first port of call for most young people for sort of early intervention mental health services, basically. So that's roughly the structure of the organisation. How do we do it? Evidence-based approach. Try and keep doing the things that are working and stop doing the things that aren't working, of course. Responsive to need. What do young people need? What are they telling us? What do they want us to do? Innovate and create. So it's a youth work charity. It's about 130 employees. In some respects, we're quite lucky around that because we can kind of, I suppose, design things and do things our own way to a certain extent. And then obviously, what I said before, try and be led by young people, so youth board, participation groups, that sort of thing, and try and get young people as much as we possibly can to co-design and co-test our work. And then of course, we like to collaborate with people, have to do that in the voluntary sector, locally, regionally, nationally, and even a little bit internationally as well. We do have a kind of an affiliation with an Australian youth work organisation, and we've been a couple of little exchange trips there as well. So on to the bulk of the presentation now. Some of the pressures facing young men and how Young Somerset works with those young men. So, understanding the landscape. So I think we ought to sort of start by acknowledging the sort of the weight that young men carry in society today. I don't think the world, people may have noticed this, is getting any more straightforward, any more less complex. So young men, we feel like navigating a world that's full of contradiction. They're asked to be tough, but also open up. They're asked to be driven, but also not to overwhelm. So driven within certain constraints, and also be seen but not stand out too much. So these different contradictions for young men are not straightforward to navigate. And of course, all the while some young men grappling with trauma, school disruption, unstable housing, poverty, or an absence of emotionally available role models. So that's a really key part of youth work as well, is kind of providing role models for young men. So in Somerset, We see these pressures manifest in boys that disengage from school. Unfortunately, Somerset does have quite high NEET, that's not in education and training or employment figures. Often young men who come through the doors at Young Somerset, they're angry, they're withdrawn, they bottle stuff up, either internally or externally. So powder keg is too strong a word, but there's sometimes a lot going on for them, and they don't really know how to handle that and regulate some of those emotions. So, what does resilience really mean? In a way, I feel we sort of might need to redefine resilience in a small way. We're not just talking about it at Young Somerset from the point of view of individuals, but as an organisation. So, and part of that is access to the right supports. And that was something I was thinking about actually in the previous speakers, was how do we enable some of these young men to access the services that are available for them? Because you can set these things up, but if you can't get young people or young men to actually make an effort to access the service, then it's a real struggle. So at Young Somerset, we look at resilience as a process, not a personality trait. So it's built when a young person feels seen and valued, equipped with tools for self-regulation, really important, safe enough to explore their own identities, and encouraged to reimagine what's possible. Just a little mini case study, a little side from myself. So a lot of what you're hearing is kind of Nick's words, as he would have presented them, but I'll do the sort of sides and mini case studies. I was working with a young person about 3 or 4 years ago. She was from Wellington, not actually a young man, but a young woman. She'd never seen the sea, despite being 14 or 15. So we talk about encourage to reimagine what's possible, expanding horizons, that sort of thing. That's a really important part of what we do. I think, obviously, we saw the Bristol Channel, trips up to the Corners, Kill Beach, that sort of thing. I think she then encouraged her family to take the family down to Lyme Reefs as well, so she's seen the sea on both sides of Somerset there. So resilience isn't about how much hardship someone can endure in silence, it's about how well they can adapt with support, reflection and hope. Pathways to resilience. Do they work for everybody? The power of participation. As I mentioned just briefly, participation, getting young people involved in service design and how we run things, really important. So many pathways to resilience in systems that we at Young Somerset work with and systems we work alongside. So school-based interventions, ELSA, that's emotional literacy, behaviour mentors, SENCOs, special educational needs coordinators for those not so familiar with the jargon. Youth-led programs like peer mentoring or Young Somerset's We've Got This. Therapeutic support's a big part of Young Somerset's work. CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, mental health support teams. Those are our teams working in schools with young people, face-to-face, working through some of their issues. And community settings. So the community settings that Young Somerset runs, we have shops in Taunton, and we run a cafe in Taunton as well. We're expanding those services, so there are opportunities to get young people to kind of access public-facing places where they interact with customers, but in a fairly safe and controlled way, both for them and the customers, of course. So for some young men, these pathways are transformative. They click, they work really well. But for some young men, they don't. And we'll come on to that in just shortly. Why aren't these pathways, why aren't these youth-led programs we're setting up for young people, why aren't they engaging with them? Maybe it asks them to come too far too fast, they're not ready for the journey. It fails to acknowledge their identity, their trauma, or their context. So we, as an organisation, we've got to ask ourselves, are we offering support in the right space? Are our messages delivered in a language that feels safe and familiar? Are we co-producing these pathways with young men that are meant to serve? So are the young men, are they actually involved in how we are delivering these services and making sure their voices are truly heard? Right, reimagining the system. Systems change, revisiting pathways, not repeating mistakes. So when a pathway doesn't work, we cannot afford to blame the young person, we must revisit the design. Another little aside from me, we were working with a young person over the summer from Taunton. He'd been convicted of a very serious offence. He's been released on licence from his 34-month sentence at a Young Offenders Institute. We couldn't get through to this young person at all. The programme had been set up for him. We really tried. We tried everything we could possibly think of. All sorts of activities, ideas, engagements, but he was so closed off and just not receptive to the work we were trying to do. So unfortunately it didn't work, and he's not been able to access the support he obviously needs, both for his safety and wider society's safety. Unfortunately we've not managed to help him, and he's back in the Young Offenders Institution. So we need to kind of think about those processes and why we weren't the organisation that was able to help him. So lots of learning to do as part of the process. There's my little aside. So pathways, we need choice. Young men must be able to opt in, shape the pace and define their goals. Pathways need a relationship, one that builds trust through consistency and respect, not instruction. We need to build representation, reflect their culture, their values, their experience, and also we need purpose, real-world relevance. That's probably what we're struggling in what I just mentioned before. Accreditation, skills for life, not just managing behaviour. So it's something we think about even inside Young Somerset, kind of breaking down those kind of internal silos almost within the organisation, because we receive our funding from various different sources, so it's quite easy to fall into the trap of making sure you're really doing a good job for that particular funder, but not looking further across the organisation, how we can kind of sort of blur the boundaries and really help young people their pathway through the organisation, as it were. If we can revisit these things or visit these things, we can see a transformation in how we can deliver our services. Some examples, things that really work for Young Somerset, so a digital tech lab, where young men learn, repair computers, learn about coding, design. In doing so, they can reclaim their confidence. Young Rangers programs, outdoor learning up in the hills. I've been running a Young Rangers program for 3 years. That's something I've been involved with a bit personally, not directly running it, but kind of like filling in the gaps and kind of like doing some days here and there. And some of those young people, you can see how they've grown hugely in the time they've been on that program. We work with quite a lot of electively home-educated young people, and they're often quite withdrawn, not really getting out much. School had been too much, they were no longer in school. But in a different space, some of them have really thrived, gone on to college, and you can see them off to university, and kind of they really sort of turn things around. And also in schools, part of the mental health support team, part of that project, which works with young people delivering mental health services from schools. Running over time here. So that's often young person led basically, so we try and design those services with young people. There. So what we need to do next, ensure continuity across the different sectors. So it's great we're all in a room here talking together. Co-create with young people. Champion alternative metrics of success, not just attendance or attainment, but there are other ways that young people have succeeded, where they come from. Train and support adults. We need to be more emotionally available men in society for some of these withdrawn and cut off young people, young men, and fund long-term relationship-based work. Kind of work that gives young people a secure base, which is very important. And then just finally, just closing. So this is really a call to sort of arms, I suppose, to the room. We need to kind of think about these things, how can we work together, how can we support young men. So at Young Somerset, we believe that putting young people first, it's not just a slogan, although it is a good slogan, so it costs money to us. It's a really, really relevant and valuable slogan. And then we'll put young men first in practical ways, value-led ways, and hopefully, if we can do that, build relationships, make young people feel like they're heard, particularly young men, increase school engagement, improve mental health, stronger family dynamics, and sort of youth-led community leadership as well. So just in closing, so young men are not necessarily broken, but too often the systems that work with them are a little bit rigid, they're mismatched, or maybe sometimes indifferent. So we need to be the system that needs to flex around the young men. Because if you give young men the right pathways at the right time, the right people, they don't just become resilient, they can become unbreakable. So try and build those pathways together, revisit them, and never let's stop asking, are we truly putting young people first?